You're listening to Trek FM.
Want to join in the conversation and share your thoughts on this episode? Join the Babel Conference, our listeners' discussion group on Facebook. Just type BABEL into the Facebook search field, and we'll look forward to seeing you there.
This is Steve Sansweet of Rancho Obi-Wan, and you're listening to the 602 Club.
Welcome to TFM's local watering hole, and I'm just one of your hosts here, Matthew Rushing. So excited to have back, as she is with me most of the weeks, but Christy Morris, it's so good to have you back here in the 602 Club.
That's Lilu Dallas, Multipass.
Multipass.
Multipass. Yeah, she heard. It's a multipass.
Oh, man. Today is going to be so much fun. We're going to be diving into what is, I think, become almost a cult classic, kind of in many ways. The Fifth Element. And so excited to be doing that with you, Christy. And before we do it, of course, just want to say a quick reminder, find us wherever you get your podcasts. Please, if you're on Apple Podcasts, we'd really appreciate it if you gave us a star rating and review. It still helps the show grow. It helps people find it as they're searching for podcasts, and the Apple system is still one of the main places, honestly, the main place, even for this show, that people find it. So we would really appreciate that. Of course, again, you could find it wherever you get podcasts. So whether on Spotify or, Amazon Music or any of the podcatchers out there, you can find us, and just make sure you're subscribed and you'll get the show as soon as it drops. Of course, please, if you're listening to the show, go over to Twitter and follow us on the 602 Club. Also on Instagram at the 602 Club TFM. Those are great ways to keep up with everything that's going on with the show, especially as John Mills and I have a Snyder Cup that's coming out very soon. And then, of course, you could find us online at Trek.fm or on Facebook at facebook.com/TrekFM. And then there's the listeners-only discussion group, the Babel Conference, where you can talk to listeners from all over the world about what's going on the network. And then last but not least, do want to say a huge thank you to our associate producers here, Ken Tripp, Davis Grayson, Ryan Millett, and Daniel Noah. They support us on Patreon. Make sure that the 602 Club, as well as the rest of what's on the network, keeps coming to you. And in all honesty, folks, our Patreon is definitely been dropping, and we could definitely use your support. So please go over to patreon.com/TrekFM and see how you can be part of our team. So, Christy, we already mentioned that we're going to be talking about The Fifth Element. And as we do many times with so many of these films that we've been talking about, because we haven't had as many new releases, I was really wondering how you came to this movie, like how you found it.
Yeah, so this actually came out, I'm going to age myself, when I was 10 years old. And it was actually not one that I saw in the theater, but that my dad showed me at home when it came out. I believe either he bought it on physical media or we watched it on TV. But I was even asking him today if he remembered the very first viewing, and he couldn't remember. We've seen it that many times. So, yeah, for me, that's, another in the long list of things that like my dad and I always share and joke about and have those one-liners that we will bring into conversations randomly. So, there's just films like this that become ingrained in your vernacular. And I'm wondering if it's the same for you.
So before we started recording, you kind of asked me this question, and I can't truly remember the first time that I saw this movie. And it came out in 97, which was, I was a senior in high school at that point. And I'm pretty sure that I ended up seeing this in the movie theater. But it's one of those things where, like you said, the movie has been with me for so long now that it's hard for me to remember exactly when I saw it. And, I've liked it since the first time I saw it. I think it's a crazy, zany, ridiculous adventure with tons of, it's just out there and fun, and it has its own sense of being, which is neat. It wasn't like any of the other sci-fi type stuff I had seen, really. I think this is pulp sci-fi at its best. So,
right.
I guess.
Oh, like that's
yeah,
that's
should
the
get my
reason I'm
ratings
glad
now. We
that-
could be done.
No. We have much more to say about that. But I did want to say, like, that's the reason, too, that I was curious, because I'm glad that you wanted to do this one with me, because this is something that is so different. Although it, combines a lot of things you see usually in science fiction movies
Right.
and books and TV, there's also a lot of new things. And then the way it weaves all of them together, it's just its own thing.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And, what's fascinating about this film is that it really was a long time coming. The director, Luc Besson, who directed this, he's gone on to direct many other things. But, this was a story that he had started when he was 16 years old. By the time it comes out, he's 38, so, this movie had a long gestation period. And, I think it's really interesting to me because of that, that this movie has so long been in the workings for him, and it was something he'd been working on for a long time. And it's really after his work on Leon and The Professional, which he has the clout and I was watching... So I bought the 4K edition, and it's the 20th anniversary edition. And that he was talking about this idea of, once he had done those films, then movie studios came to him and were like, well, what do you want to do? And he was like, this. And so, what I think is really interesting about this movie is it's mixing the ideas that kind of, been in pop culture for, I think, a long time, of like aliens having to do with like an ancient Egypt and all of this, the kind of thing. And so I was wondering, as a story idea, how all that works for you.
I think it ends up working really well together for me, because I think that that's always been something I've heard as somebody who also loves Egyptian history and, the tombs and everything. That the theories were by some people and even scientists that everything was so perfectly done in Egyptian culture that it had to have been some kind of alien or divine intervention, because, it's like the way the pyramids are shaped and the direction they all face and things like that. So I thought that was a really good way for him to put that in to this kind of story. Just go with that and say aliens did it, and that the hieroglyphics have to do with them. But then it also kind of even ties into religion.
Yeah.
If you look at the way that they're saying that there's this perfect being at the center of it all, and that this whole thing is about the battle between good and evil and light and dark. And
yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right in that. And, I think it is a fascinating idea. And, one of the things that I think is, like you said, just kind of really smart about this is that it combines a lot of things that we are quite familiar with, and by giving us the opportunity to really play around with the idea that, ancient Egypt was linked with an alien culture. Obviously that's something that's also been played with in Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. This idea that an ancient, and very advanced alien race had come down to Earth. And I think it makes it really interesting then to be able to play with those ideas. And so I liked it. I thought that this, I thought in many ways, they did a really good job with this in that, and it made a lot of fun. And like you said, what's really interesting is that, this does kind of play with the ideas of religion, and it makes it does have a slight depth to it in that sense. Like you said, this is this idea of a perfect being, and them being the one that will help save us. And it's what's interesting here, obviously, I think is really fascinating, is how that seems to happen frequently. Like, it's not just something that happens every once in a while, but, you know, like in the sense of, and I mean frequently in the sense that it happens like every 5,000 years or whatever, like this happens to be a thing.
It's pretty frequent.
But I mean, you know, more than once, right? And so this perfect being has the responsibility then to, you know, to save the human race. And so, I thought that this was really, really interesting. And I like the way, you know, that Besson creates the story, and I think it works really well. And it turned out to be a lot of fun, you know, and it was just smart, you know, and I think, as you were mentioning earlier, it is just very different than any of the other types of sci-fi that were really popular, I think, at the time, you know. Obviously, there was so much happening sci-fi wise, you know. Obviously Star Wars, big deal, and things like that, but this was its own thing, you know. And I think it was really I think that's also one of the reasons why I don't think it really hit as well immediately with people, because this really was different than most people expected. So, and what I found really fascinating was that it has a comic inspiration, in the sense that Besson met a couple of French comic creators, one of whom had helped create Valerian and Lorien, who, you know, that series, Valerian and 1,000 Moons, that get turned into a movie by Besson later on. They helped with the production design and the film design. And so, and they're a major influence for what, you know, the movie ends up looking like, which makes sense. When I read that, I was like, oh, okay, I can totally see that this was, you know, two comic book artists that really helped create this. And I think it really helps, again, I think it helps set the movie apart by making it its own thing. And I really appreciate it. I because the look and the feel of the movie, it does have a slightly cartoonish bent to it. And yet at the same time is super imaginative as we're looking towards the future and everything, and, you know, playing around with, and it, put it this way, it's kind of like how Back to the Future 2 plays with that idea, but this I thought was much better in its extrapolation of, you know, what things may look like, and you know, what things would be. So yeah, this really worked for me, and what these guys created, I thought was spectacular, honestly.
Yeah, I had to include that too. So I'm glad that you brought it up, that the design of everything, you can kind of tell after hearing that there are scenes that are reminiscent of like a comic book spread. You know, I think back to the first scenes that you see of the city. I believe it's Brooklyn where Corbin Dallas lives. You know, it's images, freeze frame that you would think you'd see in a comic book, of when he's pointing straight down and heading toward the fog, you know, weaving through 1,000 different cars, and then, you know, having them all as like hover cars. Yes, reminds us of things like Back to the Future 2, but, you know, there were other things that had depicted us possibly having flying vehicles in the future before that too. So I like that he was inspired for the world building by comic artists, and that they end up working together again. And it's really cool that they have such a neat look for the cities, for the ship on Floston Paradise. I thought was an interesting play on a cruise ship, but in the future. And even like the apartment that Corbin Dallas lives in, you know, the planes, things like that, because it doesn't also seem that far-fetched that it would end up that way. If you've seen like some of the hotels in Japan now have sleeping situations like those little human cubicles.
Yeah. No, I 100% agree with you, and I think one of the things that this movie does that's really smart and is that it has a sense of everything kind of being cohesive, and in many ways it's like an uber extrapolation of the life in New York City now, but then in many ways I think this is really kind of a precursor to Coruscant, right? Like what New York looks like here is kind of what we get in Star Wars, especially once we get to Episode 1, Episode 2. We see a little glimpse of this in 97 when we see the end of Return of the Jedi and the celebration on Coruscant. We kind of get an idea of what that's going to look like later in the prequels. But, in many ways, I do wonder if, Lucas saw any of this because, like you talking about the way that the flying cars work and the fact that they still have like traffic lanes we can see, with the flying cars and everything. That's all very Coruscant-ish like, that we would see in Star Wars. So, they, I think, did a fantastic job of kind of setting this up in a really interesting way and creating a look and a feel for the film that just feels really right. I think that on top of what makes this movie really interesting is obviously Besson is European, and I think that kind of plays into the way the film's costumed. We get this kind of outlandish, outrageous-looking costumes, really bright, garish colors in the future. And I think it almost feels like the 80s on steroids in the sense of what the costumes look like. But I like it. Again, I think one of the things that makes this work is that it really fits. And it feels cohesive as a whole for the creation of the world, the costumes the characters are wearing, the effects work and everything. So I rewatching it, I was finding myself impressed with the creative aspect of the look and the feel of the film, all of the behind the scenes work that must have gone into the look of this film. And I mean, Besson was even talked about this a little bit in the extra that they had, specifically on the 4K, which was, this is the movie right before, effects really change. Like, the effects world completely changes, in 98, and as you move into, the, what you're going to see in, like, The Phantom Menace. But this is right before that, before it really took over. And so many of these effects are still with models and everything. And so all of that together, it still really works, I think it's good.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that too, because I love that they blend practical effects and then the digital work and the costumes all together so well. And I did want to add to the costuming. Every single costume apparently was done by French designer Jean-Paul Gaultier, who is known for having a really controversial style. And in particular, I was watching an interview where they were talking to Chris Tucker about his costumes for Ruby Rhod, because to me, those stood out more than anyone else in the movie. And he said, that is never something that I would have worn. And he said, but, Jean-Paul was telling me about how he came up with the idea for this character's look. And the more that I was putting on the costumes, the more I got into it and was inspired to be like a mix of Prince and Michael Jackson. And I said out loud, oh my God, I thought of Prince when I saw him for the first time.
Well, and you're right, because the costuming absolutely looks like those two characters put together.
Yeah, like he's effeminate in attire, but completely still a man,
Yeah.
And showing that a lot of the characters in this movie play with that line of gender. Like even, Lilu being the star female character leans into masculine sometimes. And, then you have Ruby Rhod leaning into feminine, and then you have people in the audience at the opera and the diva. Can we talk about her costume?
Yeah, really cool, beautiful. So,
oh my God, to do that cosplay now.
And I think that's one of the things that really stands out in this film is the way that it is costumed, and again, that's one of the things that sets the movie apart with the look of the film. And I think one of the things that makes it work is that it fits with the kind of outlandish nature of everything else that they did with, obviously the cabs. It's a throwback, right? It looks like a cab you would hail today, maybe in New York, the classic look, but at the same time, it also fits within this world, and the fact that they're still going to McDonald's, and and I also think what kind of works here is the interesting nature of, in Star Trek: The Next Generation, in the very first episode, they kind of have a look of what soldiers look like in the future, like from the 22nd century of our world, and they're similar to this look here, where it's almost like ultra militaristic police officers, that are like in all of this body armor and everything. Yeah. So that all felt really interesting, and again, it felt like it was kind of pulling from things that I had seen before. So in many ways, I'm just
Judge Dredd, again,
impressed with how everything in the film works towards one cohesive feel. Like, you sometimes have those films that you watch where something just feels off, whether it's, the costuming, or whether it's the music, or whether it's, the effects, or just something like that. And I think this is a movie that genuinely, you could tell that everybody behind it had put in a lot of work together to make sure that this felt like a movie that all belonged together.
100%. And I think that if you hadn't had such great effects and creatures and costumes all working together, that it wouldn't have been as good of a movie.
Right.
But
and I mean, we should also talk about that. I think that the costuming work that they do for the creature design is phenomenal. I think it's excellent work. It still holds up, and so much of it is real on-screen stuff. And, in many ways, it's the kind of thing that we'll see them continue to refine in costuming till what we get in, like, what we see in The Mandalorian, right? This continues that type of trend, in the sense that the shoulders we see people standing on now come from things like this, where we're really pushing the boundaries of characters wearing costumes, yet at the same time having these massive, animatronic heads and things like that. So I really, I again was impressed with that as well, because all of that really still works for the most part in this film.
Yeah, like the look of the actual aliens that came down to Egypt. These like huge looming metal suits. I think I even saw someone at Dragon Con one time do that costume, and I was blown away, because for one, just the size of it, but that design is so unique, and it even looks more friendly when you're using it to depict a, good group of people. It's interesting that it gives off that vibe.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, then the hunters that Zorg's using as well, I mean, those guys look great as well. And just the way that they really, their facial structures and how that all moves too is just phenomenal. So I think it's really good. I think, and another thing that's really interesting about this movie is that they almost didn't get to have Bruce Willis in the role just because of the cost of him at that point. Bruce Willis was a big deal. And so, but I can't imagine this movie without him. Like, I don't think this movie really works, because in many ways he's kind of playing that character that he made famous in Die Hard. And you need that guy who's like rough and tough, but at the same time, really has a heart in this film.
Yeah, I think that it's so interesting hearing that it could have been Mel Gibson instead. I was like, no, it just is not the Mel Gibson role. What we know him as, being so great in, this isn't his MO. I think that you definitely, like you said, had to have Bruce Willis for this kind of character. And two, it's nice to see, like the scene where he lays down on the bunk bed and is telling his friend about how he met this girl. Mm-hmm. It's like he suddenly softens and it's really sweet. And then, like when he asks her name or tries to wake her up and chooses to kiss her and gets a gun to the head, it's so funny the way that he can play with this character and then also have that tough side, and be that protector. But it's like it's a very 50-50 relationship between Corbin and Lilu. They both protect each other.
Yeah, I think that you really nailed something when you said that it's about him having a tough side and a soft side all at the same time. Like, that's really key to this role. Mm-hmm. And Bruce Willis, I think, pulls that off because, he ends up having this really important role to play in helping this perfect being do the job that she's meant to do. And without him, the universe wouldn't go on because evil would have taken over. And that is all down to the fact that it's because he's got he's not just a tough guy. He's got a heart. He's got a soft heart. And him making that work is really paramount to this film.
And it's interesting, too, that they have his character a couple of times mentioned before he ever even meets Lilu, mm-hmm. that he hasn't gotten over his ex-wife. Mm-hmm. And he's still looking for the quote-unquote perfect woman. And so it's just so, ironic that they choose those words and then she literally falls into his lap.
Yeah. Or his cab.
Or his cab.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And it's interesting, too, because, you have him playing with, against Milla Jovovich, who is, I think, great in this role. I think one of the things that really helps is that, she's not really, at least for most people, I think at that point, a household name at all. She's been in Dazed and Confused. She's been in some other things. But, most people probably really aren't as familiar with her at this point. And she does such a great job because part of this is she's having to speak a language which nobody understands, and emote in all of that. And I mean, just like her being like, "Ooh, chicken, good,"
Yeah,
she's hysterical, but at the same time, she has a ton of gravitas. And she makes you feel for this character and what she's going through. She obviously can pull off the action, and she does it really well. And, of course, she's going to go on and do the Resident Evil movies, which, there are like 1,000 of those now. But she's excellent at that. But she really makes this work. I mean, again, like you said, Bruce Willis and her are a partnership in this film. And without her, I do think it would be a detriment to the movie.
For sure. She is the heart of the movie. I think that it's her that really shows the audience through her eyes everything that humanity is doing wrong. Like it's saying she's got to watch through all of this stuff in the computer to learn about what she's been missing on Earth, so she can catch up and then know where to begin to save it. And she's talking to Corbin about how terribly sad it is seeing the war that humanity's been through and seeing the way that people treat one another and, the trash and, all of the terrible things that she sees. So you do feel that sense of, yeah, I kind of agree with Lilu sometimes of what is worth saving. And so it's that even glass half full, glass half empty question of it's all in how you look at it. And that Corbin is the one that comes in and says, this is what is worth saving. That there are still a lot of wonderful things, even though you see a lot of bad things.
Yeah.
So,
No, I mean, the way that she's able to play the role in such a childlike way, yeah, at the same time, she's obviously just completely dangerous as a being, and I think it really works, and I think it helps, again, the fact that, she is somebody that people aren't as familiar with, and so to come in and play something like this, if you come up and you come in with any preconceptions about who that person is as an actor, it can hurt the role. But here I don't think that is the case at all, because she just gets to be this character without any of your preconceptions about who or what she can play or can't play, and she's able to rock the idea of being the perfect being. And so I do think it really works, and so I really like her in the role, and gosh, so glad too. Besson was a big fan of Gary Oldman. They were friends, and he's just so good in anything he does, and he's just hysterical in this role as Zorg.
Yeah, I was wondering too if they even had like a denture piece that they put over his teeth to make him look like he had more buck teeth to play this character, because it looked very intentional. But yeah, I mean, his costuming was so cool, but he really came in and just made it so much more evil. And, even having that more sniveling side of he's even just thinking that he is the one in charge, but is really just a pawn for Mr. Shadow, I think is interesting. And he's so good. I mean, like you said, we've seen him in so many other things, and there's a reason why.
Right.
I mean, I think that he's sort of that person that could play the perfect villain every time.
Yeah, I think what really made him work in this was the fact that he was fantastic at playing somebody who's just completely amoral and absolutely sees nothing wrong with it. Like, he plays it off as if it is the most normal thing in the world to be the way he is and to think the way he does. And so I think that's, you need a character who can really sell that, who completely is in love with himself and what he thinks he's going to get, in this process. And so, and then, somebody who's legitimately, you could believe, would be willing to sell the soul of the entire human race for his own benefit, basically. And he, again, I mean, I don't know if it's a compliment to say, but he plays it perfectly. And I think that is a testament to just how good, that Gary Oldman is. Like, he can play anything, and I think he does this really well.
Yeah, I'm with you. And two, I think the scene that jumps out the most to me is his best scene in this movie is when he is talking about his plan to take over the world and starts choking on a cherry. And the priest says, and it all comes raining down because of a little cherry.
Yes. Well, and that's where, Ian Holm playing Vito Cornelius, he does a really good job as well, I think. Being the priest who is the one which is charged with this mission that's been going on for generations of priests waiting for their time. And I thought this was, he's just so much fun. And I think that was also his best scene, because I thought he really got a chance to portray all sides of this character. Kind of the bumbling guy who's not quite sure how to help. But here, he plays a little bit of vindictiveness, like a little bit of self-righteousness in some ways, which, the movie kind of helps you believe that he's earned with the way that Zorg has been acting. So, but he was great. I mean, Ian Holm is such a good actor. Obviously, most people probably know him from Lord of the Rings, playing Bilbo. But he's really fun in this movie, and I think you can tell he's just having a good time with it.
Right. Yeah, I think that he obviously, I knew him from Lord of the Rings first, but he is just so funny. And I do think you can tell he's having a good time. I think especially in this every scene where Lilu just starts undressing in front of everyone and he has to turn around. He's like, I can't get her to stop doing that. And he, I think that that's his best scene too. I'm glad you said that because he really gets to show he's not just the fool or the guy that's there with this divine purpose, but also can be human and make mistakes and be more of that self-righteous, vindictive person of, saying, well, you deserved it, but then deciding that he is the good person he thinks he is and saves the guy's life anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I mean, in some ways, with him being the priest, it's kind of like he's trying to make a point to that, to Zorg. And Zorg's too far gone to get the message or to care, but his message is true of, what good is all of this if nobody's there to save you when, you've got a cherry stuck in your throat and, there's no...
Yeah.
You got no droid that's going to help you. You got no robot that's going to help you. You got no friends. So what good is it? And I think that is a really good message, and it makes that scene, I think, really powerful in the movie. You already talked a little bit about Chris Tucker, but obviously I think for me, this is probably one of the first movies I really remember kind of seeing him in a big role. And then of course he'd be in like Rush Hour and all those type of movies, which is really interesting. So, he had a big 2-for-1 really in many ways. But I think, I'm sure for some people he probably gets on their nerves, but I think he's fantastic in this role and he plays it, in many ways he's the same side of the coin as Zorg. Like, he's just absolutely self-absorbed, only cares about himself, and it's interesting to see those two sides of the same coin. Like, he really is just the same. And I think it's good for the movie. And, he's pretty stinking funny.
Well, and it's so funny that, he's not intentionally trying to do bad in the world like Zorg is, but he's just as selfish.
Yes.
He doesn't even notice that, everything in every scene he's in is about how it affects him, not anyone else, not even humanity. It's about how it affects him. Like, he gets in the spaceship after the long fight scene on the cruise ship and says, I think that was the best show I ever did.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I definitely see how it being such a in-your-face character could bug some people and rub you the wrong way. But for me, it was like he completely won me over because it was this really over-the-top character, but also because he, like I said, he's not trying to do bad. He does end up helping, but he's learning things along the way and that maybe becoming a little bit less selfish, seeing that, there's so much more at stake going on than just your one little life.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Yeah. And I think it works. I think he does a really good job in the film. And I can't think of any other person who could have played this the same way and done as good of a job as he does in it. And so,
and what girl out there that saw this movie doesn't want to be a stewardess having him whisper in your ear?
I don't know. I'm a little creeped out by that part personally, but yeah.
You don't need some stamps because he's going to send you home. Oh, excuse me. It says in the credits, stewardesses.
It's true. No, one of the things you kind of mentioned earlier, and it is, something that, this is a theme of the film, which Besson, he knew the movie was big and goofy, but he did want this one big theme, which was, what's the use of saving life when we see what we do with it? And I think it is a really big question, and I think the reality of the answer to that question is actually a little bit harder than we might even get in the movie, which is we're not really worth saving. There's nothing about us that is worth saving, especially when we look at what we do with our lives, and what we do with the power we have and what we do. And just none of those things make us, I think, really worth saving. And yet there are some things that make life beautiful, and the big answer is really love. And I thought it was interesting that this movie and Interstellar really share that theme, which is that it's love that transcends time and space, and it's love that makes things worth it, that is the hopeful counterbalance to things like war. And I again, this movie's big and silly and crazy, but I really like that part of the film.
Yeah, that to me is the thing that brings it all together and that gives it the heart that makes me want to come back and keep watching it. That it even shows, on the lines of what you're saying, that love transcends all these other things. For Corbin and Lilu, it also transcended language. And we see that in real life when people that don't speak the same language can somehow fall in love. There's clearly something between two people that doesn't require words where it, grows that bond, and you see similarities in each other. And I think that that's something that is worth saving. And I think that it also, the movie makes you ask that question of yourself, how do you feel about that? Does it make you feel like there are things that are still good in the world and worth saving? So I think that the fact that it has that is the best part of the whole thing. And then everything else is just fun stuff.
Well, and what's interesting too is because we talked about this a little bit, but you have this kind of unbridled selfishness of Zorg, or even as we talk about Ruby, but then you have this, and I labeled it, and I don't know if it makes any sense, but this kind of pessimistic selflessness of Corbin Dallas. He is willing to put his life on the line for something he really cares about, and willing to put his life on the line for the rest of the world and the rest of the universe, and so I do think that there is that. It's not just that he, falls in love with Lilu. I think also he could have pointed to the fact that he's willing to do whatever it takes to save the universe, even if it would cost him his own life. And that is kind of the big message that, we've talked about over and over again with so many things we watch, but this idea between, what do we do with the life we've been given? Do we live a completely selfless life? Do we live a completely selfish life where it's only about us and we're willing to hurt anybody to get what we want? Or are we willing to live a life that we might not get everything we want, but it's actually going to be better for everyone around us, to be selfless, to be loving, to be sacrificial. And, I think, this movie has some of that. And I think it is the thing, like you said, it keeps me coming back too, because it's not just a big, dumb adventure. It really does have something to say. It has something to make us think. And, I the more, we live in the world we live in today, the more I see that this is something that, truly is for us to think about, and whether whether it's down to our fandoms, how we interact in our fandoms, all the way to how we interact on, a corporate level as a country and as a world. And, you just think about all these ideas. I think it's good.
Yeah, I think that that's something you can always take away from this, is how it affects all these other areas of your life and your own outlook on it. So I know you and I are definitely on the same page with that. And I know we say it a lot, but the selfishness versus selflessness of it all, I think, seems to keep coming back.
Yeah, and it is interesting, because obviously that's such a huge thing in the Star Wars franchise, but I think it is something to which so many filmmakers do come back to, because we realize intrinsically that we can't live in a way where a world is completely amoral. We can't live in a way where there's no, right or there's not a right or wrong, that there isn't some kind of basis for morality or any of these things, because it doesn't work. And what we truly want is there to be a life where people are more selfless than they are selfish, because we realize that that's actually better, even if we don't necessarily live like that all the time. And I think that's fascinating, that tension to which we live in, because I think our human nature calls us to be more selfish than we are selfless, and it takes a lot more work to be selfless than it is selfish. And I think that says something about human nature. And this movie has something to say about human nature, because I think we see, again, it's much easier to be on the selfish side, because even if you're just like Ruby, where you're not intentionally being selfish, it's just all about you, and so you do what you want, and again, it's not like you're intentionally trying to hurt people, but you just don't care enough, because you're the center of your own universe. So, what did you think about? And this was something that, because I haven't seen the movie in a while, so coming back to it, I was really surprised, to listen to the soundtrack and how this is a movie from '97. But it sounds like an 80s soundtrack.
Yeah. Oh, I think that definitely when you first hear the that more like futuristic instrumental music, it reminded me a lot of like things that you might hear on like Blade Runner, or even like Running Man. I don't know, more movies like that. It's just very like aggressive techno sounding stuff. So I get what you're saying for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things is that it works, and there's a ton of kind of like mixtures of music, whether it's kind of got some reggae to it or opera, instrumental, futuristic music. But it kind of all flows into much more of an 80s soundtrack sound. But I think that's what makes it kind of work, because this movie in many ways, even though it's made in 97, it does feel like an 80s film almost, with the, because the clothing, again, like we talked about the costuming, so much of the costuming kind of feels like the punkness of the 80s, and like a futuristic punk. And I think the music, then by kind of having more of an 80s feel feels really good. But, I think the paramount and I think the pinnacle of the music in the movie is obviously the opera scene, and how well it works with, the fight we get with Lilu, which was really, really well done, and a scene that, you kind of almost want to rewind and watch again.
Yeah, I love that timing of them pairing the beats of the music with her punches, because I literally every time start punching in the air because I'm so excited.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that it's really cool how they can include so many different kinds of music together and it still works. And in the reggae scene, it works to have reggae there because they're showing that like, these are like the guys that are hanging out, just doing their everyday job, trying to get the vehicles ready to launch. And they've got their music on. It's a very like laid back scene of just some guys doing their job. And then, with the opera, they're at an opera.
Right.
So it makes sense to have opera music. And, actually, side note too, I don't know if you've seen, but there have been YouTube videos of actual opera teachers, like voice coaches, evaluating this scene and whether her singing the certain way she does is capable by a regular human being trying to sing opera. The piece in the middle where she gets really quick with the beats, because it sounds almost computerized, and turns out that part is.
It makes sense.
It's not physically possible.
Yeah, it makes sense. But no, I think it definitely like you said, works, and part of that is the way that they do the different genres of music they'll use is that it does help with the world building for the universe that they're kind of creating in this future universe. So yeah, I think it all works. So I guess maybe a silly question, but what would you rate The Fifth Element?
Well, I think you just answered your own question with the name of the movie. What would you rate The Fifth Element? 5 out of 5. It's The Fifth Element. You have to.
So you're saying you give it 5 elements?
Yes. Yeah, I'm going to rate it 5 Lelus out of 5. It's something that I've watched a million times over. I think that has such big theme life questions that always keep me coming back. And then it's got actors that I love that, I originally remember being concerned even as a young person that having such big name actors all in the same movie is not a good idea, but they work in this movie. And some of them, never actually appear in the same scene together. And I think also helps that. But it put Milla Jovovich on the map to then go on to do Resident Evil. And every year at conventions, I see somebody dressed up as either the flight attendants or as her.
Lelus out there.
Yeah, either in the thermal bandages or the crop top and pants, which I've thought of doing at some point.
I usually feel like I've seen the thermal bandages, but it seems to be very popular, especially at Dragon Con.
Yeah. But it's just so much fun. Yeah. And sharing it with my dad, I always have, I feel like some kind of quote from this movie that comes up in regular conversation. And I hate when people don't get the joke when I'm like, negative, I am a meat popsicle.
Nice.
And then that's the reaction. And I'm like
come on, guys.
You ever seen it?
Come on.
No. Okay. I know I'm a nerd.
Yeah. No, so I think I'm going to give this 4 out of 5 Infinity Stones because that's kind of what those are, right? I know, but I like this movie a ton, and I think it's so much fun to watch. I really have a good time with it. I do think if I could do anything, I might have toned down a few of the scenes with Ruby a little bit, just for me personally. But it doesn't ruin my enjoyment of this film, and I had a blast rewatching it. So it's absolutely just a thrill to have gone back and seen it. It looks great in 4K too, by the way. So yeah, I love that we got a chance to talk through it, and it really is. It's what's interesting is, again, this is a movie that didn't quite hit with audiences right away, but it's become a movie that people have kind of grown to love. So I think that's really fun. Now, it is that time of the show there, Christy, where we give our recommendations. And so I'm wondering what you would like to recommend to the folks today.
Yeah, I have a really interesting one. I actually have gotten into some of the other more obscure movies on HBO Max. And don't know if you've seen it yet, Matt, but I highly recommend watching The King of Staten Island.
Oh, okay.
Starring Pete Davidson. And it actually was written by Pete Davidson and Judd Apatow and directed by Apatow, and is a semi-biographical movie about Pete Davidson's life as the child of a firefighter who died in the September 11th attacks. And what it's like living in Staten Island during that time and trying to move on from something like that in your life happening when you're a kid. So it's a really emotional story, but also just because it's Pete Davidson, it's got that humor element to it. And especially for me, I like the dark humor that he has, because he does mention in the movie and in real life all the time that he also has Crohn's disease, which I have. So yeah, he's so great at bringing the mood back up a little bit with a dark joke, but still making it an interesting thing to watch. So I think you'll love it. I recommend watching King of Staten Island.
That's great. Well, I'm going to recommend to people, since Snyder Cuts is coming soon, it's just right over the corner, so I'm going to recommend you go back and rewatch the early works of Zack Snyder, so Dawn of the Dead, 300, and Watchmen. You'll want to look forward to. All three of those, of course, Watchmen, make sure you're watching the director's cut, because that's what we'll be talking about. But yeah, it's been fun to go back. John and I have been recording those episodes. We're getting them together for everybody. And it's been really fun to, dig into that together. And we've had some fantastic conversations, so I can't wait for you guys to hear that. But that's going to be my recommend for everybody. So, Christy, though, if people would like to catch up with you and, of course, see what you've got going on, where can they find you online?
You can find me on Instagram and Twitter at BespinBell. And of course, I'm also on Facebook, occasionally chiming in on the Babel Conference. So you can find me there. And then I do another show aside from 602 Club. I do called Sabers and Spells with my good friend Amanda DeFonso. And we're on the Skywalking Through Neverland Network. And once a month talking about whatever geeky, girly stuff that tickles our fancy. So we actually just did a episode reviewing WandaVision, which is coming out this month. So I hope that you guys will check that one out. And that's at Sabers and Spells on Instagram and Twitter as well.
And you can find me on all the social media platforms. If I'm there, it's Matt Rushing02. I'm here on the network, of course, doing Literary Treks in the Orb with Chris Jones. Literary Treks is about the books and the comics of Star Trek. And, of course, The Orb is about Star Trek Deep Space Nine. Snyder Cuts is coming, so keep out a look for that. You can find me on the Nerd Party Network doing 2 shows. One is called Owl Post with Drea Kaufman, as we talk about Harry Potter each and every week, 1 chapter at a time. We literally only have 10 episodes left. So I hope you will join us for that. It's been so much fun walking through that series. And then, of course, walking through all things Star Wars with John Mills over on Aggressive Negotiations, which is a Star Wars podcast. But guys, thank you. But y'all, thank you so much for joining us.
And y'all come back now, you hear?